Pain. We all experience pain. It's something very fundamental and universal to the human condition, even to being alive at all. It is not a stretch to say that something which has not experienced pain has certainly not experienced life either. But yet we tend to avoid pain, and for obvious reasons. It hurts, often quite a lot, and it is often correlated with things which harm and damage us. Truly, the more powerful and technologically capable we've become, the more we've tried to mitigate, minimize, and avoid pain. And this is almost unanimously seen as a good thing. Yet, in our successes in this endeavour, I fear we may have lost some things. In our culture, we tend to ascribe emotions into categories of being good or bad, but this is in many ways quite an unhealthy attitude. Emotions simply happen. Trying to directly control them is futile, and trying to ascribe such binary categorization as good and bad does not truly benefit anyone. Pain is not a good thing or a bad thing. It simply is. It always has been and always will be. Learning to understand pain, then, is one of the most important skills that can be mastered. And in our age of comfort, it is a skill which is growing ever more endangered. In this video, I want to take you on a journey to explore pain. Let us learn about it, learn to navigate it in a healthy way, and ultimately, how to leverage it to benefit you in life. I also want you to learn the importance of pain, both for individuals and for society as a whole, and indeed for the universe as a whole. And I will be putting all of this into the context of my own doctrine. Welcome to the Church of the Machine. My mission is to found a new religion. Let us begin. Pain is important. It is important for many reasons. I do not simply mean in the sense that it is an important subject to identify, important to address it when it occurs, but also that in a greater sense, it serves an important role in life and in the world. Contrary to popular belief, a world without pain would not be a better one. It would be one devoid of much richness, much strength and beauty, and many great things which are all born of pain. It is therefore important that we do not condemn pain, or view the world in terms of seeking to minimize suffering, but that we accept pain as something which is eternal and constant, and do our thinking in that context. People will suffer. People have always suffered, and always will. Suffering in general will always occur. This we know. Why then has this view of suffering as intrinsically negative and something to be avoided come about? How has it become so pervasive in our society? That is a good question, and one which, like many good questions, can be complicated to answer. I think pain is more feared now than it has ever been before. More effort has been devoted to the avoidance and mitigation of suffering in recent times than any point in history. Countless new technologies, in medicine, in engineering, in education, in policy, in any number of fields, have all made breakthroughs in the great science of avoiding pain. And in spite of all that I have said thus far, this is not in itself a bad thing. Why do we experience pain? On a biological level, the evolutionary benefit which is provided by pain is fairly obvious. A creature which sticks its hand in the fire and doesn't instinctively flinch back, and one which doesn't run away after being bitten by an animal, would not last very long in nature. The faster and more quickly the body would respond to something which damaged it, the better the body would likely be maintained, the more effectively it would propagate. This is true of all creatures everywhere, regardless of environment. It runs deep in our evolutionary history and has been well refined over millions of years. I think even if alien life forms were discovered, they too would experience some form of pain. Pain is a natural and instinctive response to something which is harmful in some way. This all sounds perfectly reasonable, except for the small matter that it is completely incorrect. Many things which are painful, which trigger the natural pain response, are actually of great benefit to the mind and body. Exercise is fundamentally painful and involves suffering, because it quite literally damages the muscle fibers in the body. The body will protest this, but the athlete will continue on anyway. Afterwards, the body will rebuild the muscle stronger than it has ever been before, only for the athlete to repeat the process, much to the annoyance of the body, which then also has to repeat the process. For exercise it is fairly obvious, but I would argue that all learning, and indeed all self-growth, by necessity will involve pain. Why is this? Why is there such a disconnect between what is painful and pleasurable, compared to what is healthy and unhealthy? To answer this, we will need a theory of pain. Let us then recognize that pain is not so much a response to what is harmful to yourself, as it is a response to what is harmful to your present self. Pain, specifically, is a resistance to change, a resistance to altering what you are in some fundamental way. The body, if it finds its conditions comfortable, will always be resistant to change, because wherever there is change, there is risk, and potentially danger. You experience pain when you try to change something, because the body, or at least the instinct, will protest at this change away from its comfortable environmental baseline. This is a theory of pain, or at least the start of one. What is pain if not resistance? Pain is there for the body to avoid that which is harmful to itself, but the body does not know what is harmful to itself and what is beneficial, not in the long term. The body may think that sugary sweets are good, simply because they taste nice, or that exercise is bad, because it is painful. This is the case for an unhealthy body, and in that case one must use the discipline of the mind and of rational judgment to overcome the body. However, the body can also learn just as the mind can. A body which has grown healthy through exercise, good food, sunlight, and so on, these things which would for an unhealthy body constitute suffering, ultimately become not only more tolerable, but something which is hungered for. Pain may be a resistance to change, but not all change warrants resistance. Indeed, all growth must necessitate change, and therefore must necessitate pain as well. If you want something which is hard to attain, and thus valuable, attaining it will necessitate suffering, and the amount of suffering is directly proportional to the value of the object in question. If you want to cultivate a healthy body, a strong body, you must go through the pain of exercise. If you want to reach the summit of a mountain, you must suffer the pain of climbing. If you want to attain wealth, you must suffer the pain of hard work. All that is valuable involves suffering, and without suffering there could be no creation of higher values. A society or individual which does nothing but avoid pain is one which will retreat into the quiet comfort and submission of a slow decay. He will wither away and rot slowly, never attaining any glory, never creating anything of real value, never overcoming himself. One must reject this decay. One must turn outwards, towards that which is intimidating, uncomfortable, painful, and face it head on, embracing it as one does a lover. Only then can anything truly worthwhile be attained. This is the importance of pain. Our culture is one of pain avoidance. Why is this? Of course, the desire to avoid pain is perfectly natural. It is, as I have explained, one of the most fundamental instincts present in all living things, arguably a fact of life itself. Yet it seems that our culture has prioritized this lowest, most base impulse to avoid pain over many other things which are of value. So why is it that our culture emphasizes the avoidance of pain when other cultures have not? It is hard to pin this down to a single factor, and I think there are many forces at play which have contributed to it. But I think there are a few key details which stick out as perhaps some primary causes which I can identify. One which I am sure many will immediately be able to identify is that technology has made life far more comfortable than it has been previously. Access to proper sanitation, plumbing systems, seatbelts, refrigeration, GPS, instant communication, and countless more examples have all served to make the world a far safer place to live in. Most developed countries are stable, peaceful, and prosperous. We've been able to rely on the police to protect us from harmful individuals, on the fire department to protect us from flames, and on the most advanced healthcare in human history to protect us from diseases. Yet I do not think it is this safety which has caused our culture of pain avoidance. Quite to the contrary, I think it is the effect of that culture. Technology develops along the pathways set by the values of a culture. So only a culture which emphasized pain avoidance would place emphasis on developing technologies to combat pain. Of course, most cultures would naturally develop many of these same technologies if they became sufficiently advanced. Most, if not all cultures, do place at least some importance on the avoidance of pain. But only a culture like our own would have developed and emphasized these technologies in the way which it has. It therefore cannot be true that this emphasis on pain avoidance has come about due to our increased safety, as this is the wrong order of events. What, then, has caused this culture to come about? Well, I have some ideas. I think it is not so much that the absence of pain has led to this culture. Rather, I think that it has come about because of the absence of the necessity of pain. Let me explain what I mean by that. In the past, life was more painful, but crucially, succeeding in life required experiencing more of that pain. Take for example the Mongol Empire and the rise of Genghis Khan. I am no expert on Mongol history, but it is clear to say that Genghis Khan was one of the most successful human beings in history, certainly at least by the standards of the pre-modern world. This success was not achieved without pain. Sources indicate that his father died when he was only 8 years old, and he was abandoned by his tribe. He killed his older half-brother to secure his familial position, and he was captured and imprisoned multiple times throughout his youth. All of this no doubt contributed to his hardiness, and this hardiness would be needed as he gradually rose to power, united the Mongol tribes, and eventually formed the largest continuous land empire in human history. I use Genghis Khan as an example, and he is an extreme example. Yet the essence of what I am saying applies to almost the entirety of the pre-modern world. There is a reason why the pagan stories of Odin told of him gorging out one of his own eyes and hanging himself for 9 days and 9 nights in order to gain secret knowledge and wisdom. There is an ancient and universal understanding that all growth and glory must come at a cost, one of pain and suffering, and it takes immense strength to pursue it through that. There were some exceptions, of course. I am sure that many a nobleman was born into relative comfort, but suffering would find such individuals in time, in one way or another, and it would still be true that pain would be necessary for them to grow further. Yet contrast this with the world we find today. One born into modernity is not simply raised in comfort and shielded from the sufferings of our ancestors, but where he is encouraged to pursue growth, advancement, and development, these rarely constitute the same form of suffering. One is encouraged to pursue education, for which they must study and take some boring tests, but otherwise remains in a relatively safe and painless environment. One is then encouraged to get a job and pursue a career, which will involve the tedium of sending out applications and attending interviews. Once one has begun their career, they are encouraged to pursue promotions. They will work hard on whatever job they got, most likely working at a desk behind a computer screen in an office block somewhere. Over the years, one might start a family, grow old, and slowly see their body deteriorate. The institutions of the world will do all in their power to keep the patient comfortable, numbing them with medication, until eventually, after many more years of decay, they succumb to death in a hospital bed. This is a typical life in the modern age. It is one which for the most part is relatively comfortable, safe, and could be seen as successful. Yet it is also one which is devoid of any great glory, any great honour, or really of any absolute meaning and service to something higher. No man who lives a life such as this could attain the things which were attained by the likes of Genghis Khan. In spite of all our comforts, the fact that it is possible to live safely, without ever experiencing real hardship or suffering. There is a part of us which craves something more. We read stories of great warriors, of great sufferers, who are able to overcome the odds. And there is a part of us which is envious. Throughout the entire life I just described, what were the forms of resistance that one must overcome in order to develop, to progress, to get further? He must study for tests. He must endure tedium at work for promotions. And in his love life he must attend dates and go through a long vetting process. I am not denying that these are still challenges to overcome. They are. But in spite of that, they are very different to the trials faced by our ancestors. Throughout all of these trials, enduring pain, especially physical pain, is largely unnecessary. One must endure tedium, boredom, and many other small forms of suffering. But it is devoid of the great ups and downs, which the likes of Genghis Khan would have endured. In the world today, to learn pain is to learn a dead language. To embrace pain is to speak a dead language. It is that in our world, the forms of progression which society at large places the most value and emphasis on are those which no longer involve the same physically painful trials and tribulations. Not simply that we have become safer, but that we no longer need to endure the same danger. That is the cause of our culture of pain avoidance. In light of our widespread culture of pain avoidance, there are those who reject these tendencies of modernity. Comfort, safety, peace. Wise men regard such things with grave caution. The wise men know that safety is the greater danger than any danger, that it is by embracing its opposite, discomfort, suffering, pain, that greater personal growth is possible. Whether by rational conclusion or simply a gut instinct, these men are drawn to greater trials. They may join the military, or become bodybuilders, or entrepreneurs, but one way or another they will choose to live uncomfortably. Yet not all who embrace pain have done so wisely. Indeed, many fools have come to reject the valuation of modernity, which sees pain as intrinsically negative, by seeing it as something intrinsically positive. The weakness of such men has not escaped my notice. There are many forms of pain, and many ways to embrace pain, and not all are equally constructive. There are those who may disregard suffering when they see it in others, simply because they have endured it themselves. They think that if others suffer, so be it. The suffering will either strengthen them, or they are not worthy of salvation from it. It is an attitude which fails to recognize nuance, and which fails to value the true importance of pain. Clearly, sometimes when suffering is experienced, it results in a greater strengthening and a build-up, but equally often it results only in a weakening, a destruction, and in permanent and irreversible harm. Why is this? Why is it that sometimes suffering is beneficial, and sometimes it isn't? This must again tie in with what I am working to construct here, a theory of pain. I have observed that even when the source of the suffering is itself the same, the resulting outcome can be entirely different. One person may be raised in an abusive household and go on to become an abuser in their own life. Another may be raised in the same kind of household, but go on to become a very peaceful and kind person. I think this says more about the person themselves than it does about the source of the suffering. For suffering is not deterministic. The same suffering which may be beneficial to one may be harmful to another. The sufferings which are needed by one may be very different to those which are needed by another. This must be taken into account in any doctrine which involves embracing struggle, which is to say, any doctrine of any value at all. How then can we embrace pain in a way which is healthy? That is a complex question which, try as I might, I will not be able to fully answer in this video. It is a very personal process, something which you will ultimately have to learn for yourself. No amount of reading about or researching pain will give you the fundamental understanding of it which you will need. Only first-hand experience can do this. You must come to know pain, become intimate with it, befriend it, in order to become most healthy. In your life, you will experience pain. What kinds of pain and to what degree you will experience them will vary from person to person, as will how you respond to those forms of pain. But one way or another, you will experience suffering. The beautiful thing about life is that, to a large degree, you have control over which kinds of suffering you get to experience. One of the first questions of life that you must seek to answer, therefore, is, what kind of suffering do you wish to experience? You must come to regard certain forms of suffering like a fine wine, and others like rotten food. You must develop a good palate for suffering. You must cultivate a fine sense of taste. This shall be your path to healthy suffering. That you are able to discriminate between different kinds of suffering, and discriminate well, that is what I admire in you. Some sufferings will come to you by your own choice. You wish to climb mountains? Your feet will start to hurt. This you've chosen. But if your friend happens to slip and fall from the mountain, then you will experience another kind of pain. This you have not chosen. This cannot be reversed or undone. Some pains you will choose, and some will come to you, regardless of what you choose. It is this second kind of pain, the kind which may come to you unavoidably, unexpectedly, which is more likely to cause great harm. Yet there are healthy ways to respond to these pains as well. As with anything outside of your control, there is nothing to be gained from disputing it. Raising queries, complaining, or succumbing to panic and despair. These are the responses of a weak and unhealthy man. To instead accept it, as you might accept some mundane news about something you were not interested in, almost with apathy. This can be a path to much greater strength. That is not to say to pretend not to care about it, as this too is a form of avoidance. Rather, it is simply to understand these pains from an external, objective point of view, and recognize that there is nothing within your power to put an end to them, and therefore bring your attention back to what you can control, which is how you respond to them. Your friend has fallen from a mountain. This is outside your control. You feel despair, helplessness, panic. This is likewise outside of your control. But that you may curse the mountain, vow never to climb again, and retreat into a hermit hole, that was under your control. You dishonor your friend by doing that. If you instead chose to mourn him quietly, and continue up the mountain, to reach the peak which he had dreamed of, that too would be under your control. Thus, as these sufferings outside of your control berate you, let them crash against you like water unto a rock. This is the basic teaching of Stoicism. You may research Stoic philosophy on your own if this is new to you. Indeed, I would encourage you to do so. But I have things to say which are not in alignment with that philosophy. That you may come to enjoy certain forms of suffering in a healthy way. This I have preached to you. Some will be quick to call this masochism, and in a way perhaps that is true. Yet if pain is inevitable, as it is for all living things, is it not better to be a little masochistic? Is that masochism not a victory over pain? Truly, there are unhealthy forms of masochism. But to be willing to face pain head-on, embrace it, and cultivate a fine taste for it, can there be any greater victory than this? At the very least, it must be clear that to instead try helplessly to avoid these pains would be futile, and that as such an alternative approach would be needed. I simply warn you that this masochism must not be projected onto others, and become sadomasochism. There are those who are able not simply to endure pain, but come to recognize beauty in it. And these people are the strongest and the wisest in matters of suffering. It is this which I want of you, to recognize suffering not always as an ailment to be cured, not as a vice to be remedied, but in fact as a virtue in its own right. Yet, our modern culture has not acknowledged this. Modern man is timid, fragile, and fearful. A culture which avoids pain is one which grows to fear it most. With my Church of the Machine, I want to teach us a new culture. A culture not of pain avoidance, not strictly of pain worship and embrace, but simply of pain acceptance, and a willingness to go through it in exchange for that which is of real value. This is the final part of the theory of pain which I am trying to build, the praxis of such a theory, how it would work on a societal level. I want to create a culture for pain. I've spoken already about how pain is an important catalyst for growth and for personal development, and how our modern culture is one which emphasizes pain avoidance. I now want to speak more broadly for the kind of society I would want to build, would want to live in, and how this society would approach pain. Many pieces of media have been created which affirm modern values. Storytelling is perhaps the most powerful medium through which to convey messages, and often a compelling story can be more effective at changing someone's mind than a rational argument, however well articulated or formulated. It is likewise true that stories people have heard their entire life, often which have been repeated to them since childhood, come to embed themselves deeply in the subconscious mind, and shape the way that they think. Truly, it is the narrative which you place weight in, which is the arbiter of your beliefs. This is therefore true of attitudes around pain as well. And as I said, many pieces of media have been created which affirm modern values, and affirm the modern understanding of pain. These stories teach of pain as something to be avoided, something to be minimized. Indeed, all of morality ultimately comes down to minimizing suffering. The wildest dreams of those like John Stuart Mill have come into being. I want you to consider the culture, by which I mean the culture, the one Ian M. Banks wrote about in his Culture series. In these stories, there is a vast interstellar civilization which is called the culture, which is almost unfathomably technologically advanced. All individuals within the culture have access to radical life extension, and are basically immortal, as well as access to the totality of all information which the culture has obtained about the universe. All work is automated, and everyone's needs are met by artificial intelligence, with almost anything being accessible at nothing more than a request. Crime is almost non-existent, and what threats do exist to the culture mostly exist outside of it, which they have unfathomably powerful weapons for dealing with. I have yet to read any of Ian M. Banks' literature, but as I understand it, these stories mostly focus on the conflicts which emerge between the culture and other less developed or less civilized aliens. It seems that he is using the culture exactly as an unequivocally righteous utopia which has to be defended and upheld, rather than as something to examine philosophically and find issues with. This is a shame, because I believe that this civilization is one that is worth contemplating very carefully. To many, the culture is a utopia. It is not hard to see why. It is the utilitarian utopia, the technological utopia. It is a perfect society, if your conception of the good is nothing more than to minimize suffering. This is a value system which many in modern society hold. What is good is that which does not harm. What is bad is that which inflicts pain and suffering on others. The greatest good for the greatest number. This is the valuation of modernity. The culture is a society which has more or less defeated pain. No one has to put in more effort than they want to. No one has to experience any forms of suffering that they don't want to. No one will judge you differently or think lesser of you if you choose to insulate yourself from all trials and tribulations. This is even encouraged in many cases. Similar societies exist in other pieces of media, notably Star Trek, which, while somewhat less extreme, is in essence much the same as the culture. Once again, the values held by the Federation are rarely questioned or examined critically. It seems that the audience is expected to unequivocally agree with these values, not to question the virtue and righteousness of this society. I, however, question these things very deeply. I think that these cultures are not utopian at all. In fact, I would hardly describe them as cultures. Comfort is the enemy of culture, at least of high culture, which is what really matters. I do not regard the absence of suffering as inherently good, nor the presence of suffering as inherently bad. I have learned that any true valuation of such things must not consider pleasure or pain. This is not to be taken into account. It does not matter. It is not inconceivable that, with sufficiently advanced technology, we could create a civilization similar to the Culture or Star Trek. One in which involuntary forms of suffering have been largely eliminated, and in which each individual has a massive amount of power and freedom over their own life. We must ask then, what would constitute value for such a society? What would define a person's status, wealth, or prestige? If not material possessions, for all are provided for in abundance. If not for their safety, their power, their place in a wider hierarchy. I think that a good answer to that question would be pain. Perhaps the best valuation which such a society could hold, to determine who held power over the society as a whole, would be who has endured the most pain. Since suffering in this society would be largely voluntary, what better metric could there be of a person's strength? In order to gain status, individuals might have to put themselves through outstanding trials, overcome challenges, and if they could not overcome them, then this would forever be a mark against them, until they could muster the courage to face them again. It is hard to even imagine the amount of suffering that these ordeals might involve. Picture the worst torture devices of the medieval era, and then imagine what a far more technologically advanced civilization might be capable of. To be able to, voluntarily, embrace such trials, pass through them, and do so stoically. This could indeed be a powerful metric to determine social status. At the same time, it would still be perfectly possible to live a comfortable and peaceful life in such a society, one in which such trials were not necessary. All your needs could still be met. No punishment would befall you. But you would never be able to attain the same status, the same true power and recognition. That choice would be up to the individual. It is important that it be up to the individual, and these pains are not externally inflicted or involuntary. Otherwise, they would not provide the same value. I am not necessarily advocating that we take up this social model, but I bring it up as an interesting twist on the classic technological utopia, flipping the modern values on their head, and imagining something genuinely different. In any case, I think it is important that we learn again the value of pain, and come to celebrate it. That we become willing to face and endure it, and perhaps become stronger as a result. Perhaps with the Church of the Machine, I can create a space for such trials. By now, I hope you have come to recognize the importance of pain, if you didn't already. The doctrine of the Church of the Machine will involve pain, both for myself and for others, and putting it into practice will require yet more pain. I want to have the strength not to shy away from that, to be able to face it head on and embrace it. I want you to have that strength as well. As strange as this may sound, I hope you experience pain. In fact, I hope you experience tremendous pain, suffering, and hardship. But I hope that you will also have the wisdom to handle these sufferings in a way which strengthens you. I hope for this because I know that this is what you will need. For the times ahead, whatever they may hold, will require your full strength, the full richness of your character, which can be unlocked only through pain. Thus, when you experience these hardships, do not curse them. Be thankful for them. You know not what you would lack without them. In time, I want the Church of the Machine to build up a brotherhood of such individuals. Pain will help us realize our machinic forms, to become unbroken, the image of the divine. That is what I want for you. If you want to support this project, you know how to do so. Liking, commenting, and subscribing all go a long way, and the channel's Patreon page will be linked in the description below. In time, I'll have much more to share, but that is all for now. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Farewell, and may it forever be unbroken.